Our Spooky and Sweet quilt along is in progress. We started with the Witchy Ghost, and then we made some star blocks. And our last block, we're gonna make our ghost and stars some friends that they can go trick-or-treating with. This block has a lot of pieces, very similar to the first block, but if you follow along, I think you can do it. So for this year's quilt along, we're using Bella Solids from Moda Fabrics because we think the Bella Solids will really give it this cute look, whereas a print would maybe muddy up your design. This is a completely free pattern at Fat Quarter Shop, and if you're just joining us, feel free to catch up with all our previous videos, and we're gonna get into block 3. So the first thing you're gonna do is go to Fat Quarter Shop and search Spooky and Sweet, week 3. Download this. This one is 5 pages, but if you look at this, it's just corner squares and a flying geese. So super easy. And the most important part, like I talked about in previous videos, is to label your fabrics when you cut them. So let's get started. So we're gonna start on page 2, and the first part of this quilt is just corner square triangles. So you're gonna take a fabric R, 2 fabric G squares. You're gonna draw a line on the wrong side of your squares. I'm gonna use a friction pin. It will disappear with heat later. Now, with this quilt, you don't want to use a friction pin with anything black because it will leave a white line. From there, I'm going to use my seam-align glue. You can also use pins, and I'm going to place these on the top left and the top right. Now, with this quilt, if you're looking at this quilt, there's a lot of corner squares. You could actually do all of them at the same time. I don't want to confuse you guys, so I'm going to do them one at a time. So once you have the glue dried, you're going to stitch directly on that line, trim a 1/4 inch away, and your hair unit is going to be 2.5 by 10.5, and this is what it looks like. And then you're going to do kind of that same technique. You're going to take your fabric I, rectangle, fabric U, squares, and you're going to do that same technique. Follow your pressing arrows that are on the pattern. You're basically pressing to your squares. This is your left forehead. Do the same thing with your fabric H and fabric U's. This is your right forehead. Now we're gonna put these two together. We're gonna pin them in place and use a 1/4 inch seam to sew. So when we press these, you press both of these towards your black, following your orange arrows. And this one, you pressed one side to the white and one side to the black. And what that's going to do is when you put these together, this seam will nest. So you just put this and it'll just nest in your hands. So then you're going to pin right in that seam, pin at each end, and then we're gonna sew with a 1/4 inch seam. And we've talked about it in our previous videos, but I'm sewing with Aurifil color 2600. It's just a very light gray. We're gonna stitch on that line and press. And this should be nice and flat, and this should connect into a nice V. Now we're gonna start working on our face unit. You're gonna take a fabric N, a fabric T, and a fabric M. And what you're gonna do is pin these together, sew with a 1/4 inch seam, press towards your black, and then you're gonna add your M to the bottom, press to the white. That is gonna be your left face unit, which is right here. Then we're going to take another fabric T rectangle, take the fabric L rectangle, and the fabric K rectangle. And you're gonna sew these two together with a 1/4 inch seam, press towards your black, and add the K at the bottom, press to the white, and then you're gonna have your right face unit. And if you remember from the Witchy Ghost block, this is a very similar look. So page 2, super easy. Now we're gonna do the same thing as block 1, where we create a flying geese and then create the face. Super fun, super easy. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to make a smile unit. You're gonna take your fabric T rectangle, you're gonna take 2 fabric Q squares, and you're gonna draw a line on the wrong side. You're gonna place this on one corner, stitch on the line, trim a 1/4 inch away, press to the white. Once that's done, you're gonna add your second square. You're only gonna be making one of these. It will end up looking like this, which is 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And so it's super small. Then you're gonna take a fabric M rectangle, add it to the top. Stitch with a 1/4 inch seam, And then you're going to have your center face unit. And then you just take your center, your right, and your left. And then we can start building the face. So I'm going to pin this right sides together, and I'm actually going to pin this also. So with a 1/4 inch seam, and then we will press both of these seams towards the left and the right, away from the center. So you have your face unit. Take your fabric O rectangle, put that at the bottom, put your hair and your forehead. So then you're basically building the head of the vampire. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place this together, pin, and pinning really is key. I know I say that over and over, but if you're finding that your blocks are not coming out great, maybe you're not pinning, or maybe you're not pinning correctly. So that would be my tip. And then I'm gonna put these two together, pin, and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. Now I'm gonna take this with me so I know which way to press. Put the face back together and do one more seam. Super easy. And so like I said, this is just corner squares and 1/4 inch seams. So now we have our head unit of our vampire, and we're gonna do a collar for his face. So I'm going to move him out of the way. I'm gonna take a fabric AA rectangle, a fabric G square, draw the line on the wrong side, corner to corner. When you're looking at the pattern, you can see the way the drawn line is. We're gonna place it here, stitch on the line, trim a 1/4 inch away, press, and that is gonna be your left collar unit. From there, you're gonna take a fabric F rectangle, add it to the top, stitch a 1/4 inch seam, and then you're gonna have your left side unit. I'm gonna leave this here. We're gonna take a fabric Z rectangle, a fabric G square, draw the line, place it on the bottom right, stitch on the line, and you're gonna have your right collar unit. From here, you're gonna add a fabric B rectangle. So this one's skinnier, this one's wider. Stitch on the line and press, and then you're gonna have your right side unit. So you've got your left side and your right side, and your left is skinnier, and you can see the gray squares are on the outside. From here, we're gonna add our face unit back. And when we add that back and you're looking, these seams will nest because this is pressed this way and these are pressed this way. So when you put that together, the first thing you want to do is nest those seams and pin right there, pin at the top and bottom, and then we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam all the way down. And then we will be done with pretty much the top part of our block, and the rest is just going to be some fun little accents. So here's your vampire head unit. It's so cute. Like, I'm not a big fan of vampires, but I mean, you gotta admit, this is cute. One thing I wanted to mention is if you don't love purple, this would be really cute in pink also. So I'm gonna move this out of the way and we're gonna start with our hand units. You're gonna take a fabric AA rectangle and we're gonna do the left and the right. So I'm gonna do the left here and the right here. We're gonna take fabric P squares, fabric T rectangles. And so this is going to be your left hand and your right hand, and you just want to kind of make sure you've got it all the right way. You're going to sew the white and the black together, press, and then add your purple. And that's going to give you your left hand and your right hand. Then you're going to take a fabric S rectangle, a fabric Y rectangle, sew with a 1/4 inch seam and press. This is going to give you your handle unit. Then you're going to place these hand units on the left and the right. And if you've pressed according to the pattern, this seam and this seam will nest. So you're going to put these together, pin, and again we're going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam and we're gonna press towards the inside. And another thing I wanted to mention is if these are not fitting together perfectly, you can try and test your 1/4 inch seam, because this is just straight lines. So if you've cut accurately and it's not coming out where everything lines up, just test your 1/4 inch seam. Now we have our handle unit done. This is gonna be his left hand, his right hand, and then this is gonna be the handle of the pumpkin, which we're gonna do next. The pumpkin is super easy. It's very similar to the first block. You're gonna take 2 fabric V rectangles and 2 fabric W rectangles and put them together. Now, if you wanted to, you could put the dark on the outside. It really doesn't matter which way that you do this. And then you're gonna sew these with a 1/4 inch seam, and this is gonna be 8.5 by 5.5. From here, we're gonna take 2 fabric B squares. They're gonna go up here. We're gonna take a fabric G square and our last fabric Q square. So I like to lay them out just like this first, and then I will come and draw my lines and then glue them down. Then we'll stitch on the line, trim a 1/4 inch away, and press. And then this one, what you really want to just pay attention to is you want to have purple on the top left and right, gray on the bottom left, and white on the bottom right. And when I'm doing the glue, I use just 3 little dots. I use a little bit too much. So now I've got it all in place. I'm going to stitch directly on these lines. Now to do that, I'm going to change my 1/4 inch foot to an open toe foot. So now I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch away. I like to use a ruler and use the 1/4 inch line. You could also use scissors. I used to do that years ago. So up to you on how you want to trim these off. Set your seam. Okay, now on this block, you can kind of see how these are sticking up. They're not laying all the way down. If you want those to lay completely flat, you could leave clappers on them for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then it will be flat. It's up to you. Now we're gonna take our pumpkin unit, a fabric X rectangle, a fabric N square, and our handle unit. And here, I'm gonna do 2 things at one time. Basically, I'm gonna sew these together and these together, press, and then come back. I'm gonna sew these 2 together, and that looks like this. Then I'm gonna put these 2 together. Now, I wanna show you a trick on getting this right here to line up with this. So what I'm gonna do is on the bottom side, on the purple, don't use the friction pin on the black because it will leave a mark, that's white. So just on the purple, and then right here, you're just marking with a 1/4 inch seam so that we can get those to line up. I'm going to pin the left and the right first just to give it some stability. Then I'm gonna do my poke a pin method. That's where I poke my pin where I drew my line. I drew the line on the wrong one. Actually, we're gonna go back, and actually I'll just do it on the back. This is where I needed to actually draw the line, right here and right here. So I'm gonna poke my pin through that 1/4 inch line and then this 1/4 inch line. And I call it the poke a pin method. I do that on both. I like to do my pin straight up and down. It gives me a better result. And anytime I'm sewing over pins, I try to remove my pin right before I sew on it. Once I have that, then I will sew with a 1/4 inch seam, and we will see if it lines up. This is where in a quilt I will really start using the clapper because you start having a lot of seams. So I would definitely let that sit a little bit before I did the next step. It'll just make it nice and flat. Then we just need to attach this, and luckily this doesn't have to line up at all, so we don't have to do a poke a pin. Just make sure you're adding it to the right side. And solids show errors a little bit more than prints do. So if you're feeling frustrated, it might just be that you're working with solids. So now we finished our pumpkin and we added a handle, and this is going to be like your little trick-or-treat pumpkin. We have that done. And now we're going to move to page 5. We're almost done. Super easy. We just need to make 1 half square triangle. You're going to take a fabric A square, a fabric J square. Put them right sides together. draw lines a 1/4 inch away from the center. You can either use a regular ruler or you can use the Creative Grids seam guide to draw your lines, either one. You're going to stitch on these lines. I used red thread just for demonstration purposes. Cut away, and you're going to have 2 half square triangles. We're only going to make 1. I'm going to press toward fabric A and show you how to trim your half square triangle unit. So we made this bigger, we're going to trim it down. You put the diagonal line on your seam, and I'm just using a Creative Grids 2.5 inch square ruler. I'm just going to trim this off, turn it, and here you want to make sure you line up the left, the bottom, and your diagonal line. And you're going to have your half square triangle unit that you're going to use in your next step. Now we're going to complete our block. We're going to take our fabric E rectangle, our candy unit, our half square triangle unit, and our fabric C rectangle. And here, what I'm trying to make sure is I've got this going the right way, which of course I don't. So I'm going to sew this together with this. That's going to give me this. And my seams are going to nest if we pressed according to the pattern. So then I'm going to put this right sides together, and we're going to pin and sew with a 1/4 inch seam, and then we'll just have 2 seams. After this, we only have 2 seams left, and we will have our little vampire done. Now I noticed when I was sewing, I forgot to put a pin here, but my seam lined up, so that's great. From here, we're going to put our trick or treat unit here. Then we're going to put the head of the vampire on top, and we have our very last fabric, which is our fabric D rectangle. So I'm going to put this right sides together, and then I'm going to put this right sides together, and these seams will nest. And if you're ever making a quilt and your seams don't nest, it's okay. Just go back to the ironing table and change your seam. So I went to pin this, and speaking of seams that don't go the right way, I pressed this the wrong way. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to show you how you fix it, and you keep going. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to press this back flat. I pressed this towards the E, and this was supposed to be pressed towards the face, and I didn't do that. But instead of fixing this and this, I'm just going to change the direction of this one, because my quilt is going to have sashing, so it's not going to matter. And anytime you repress a seam, what you have to do is like really flatten it. And then you just go back doing what you were doing, and anytime you're making a mistake like that, it's totally normal. I mean, obviously, I just said that might happen, and it did. So it's kind of funny. So now we have our vampire ghost that's going to go with the witchy ghost from week 1, and I like to trim off any of these loose edges and get it nice and straight. So I'm just going to put my ruler on the edge and just get it nice and flat. This is an optional step, and I don't think most of you guys do this, and that's okay. You can let me know in the comments if you do. Totally fine if you don't. And he's so cute, and just like I said, if you don't love purple, pop in a pink. Now all our blocks are done, and we're ready to turn this into a Potion Perfect quilt. So this is week 3. Join us next week. I'm going to show you finishing options. It's going to be really cool because you can either make your quilt square or rectangle. So you have lots of options. Thank you so much for joining me for this, and remember, all these patterns are free at Fat Quarter Shop, and I'll see you next week.